Welcome back to Down the Road. I've known this next individual for quite a while. I knew him as mayor of the city of Moorhead, Minnesota. I knew him as a state legislator. I knew him as just a person that I worked with for years in the water industry. In terms of relationships between Minnesota, North Dakota, actually South Dakota as well, because that's where the head of the Red River is as it makes its way to Lake Winnipeg, which is a big part of what Morrie Lanning's been able to do too, which is bring the Canadian government in as part of our discussion on what should or could happen when it comes to water. And so I was pretty glad when Morrie was on the list of people I got to visit with. Morrie Lanning, good to have you coming down the road with us.
Thank you, Joel. It's always a pleasure.
How you been?
Been well.
Really?
Yeah, staying healthy.
Traveling around a little bit?
I'm still doing my consulting work, so still working on water.
Okay, I've got to start this way. Jim Jonas was just in, the old football guy.
Yeah.
You played a little football.
I did.
Tell them where, Morrie.
Fort Concordia.
Yeah.
National champions. And
who were you playing next to for some of that?
Well, a bunch of people. Dave Heide was our tailback.
These are names people are going to remember.
Oh, yeah.
Is my point.
Dave Heide and Merle Hall, who went on to be a professional coach for a lot of the big schools.
Mm-hmm.
And Don Gerhardt, who played Canadian football, is another one of our...
My point is, Morrie's pretty tough. He could handle... It got you ready for politics, is my my tie-in here.
For sure, yeah.
So when you ran for mayor of Moorhead, what were you thinking? I mean, being mayor of a town is a hard job.
Yeah.
Everything from somebody's dog is barking to making sure you got a water system that works. I mean, when you first ran for that, what was that like?
Well, I had been on the city council for 6 years, and I thought at that point, having been a council member, I thought I knew what it was like being mayor. Until you are mayor, you really don't know what it's like, because people are expecting a whole lot more from you than you were as a regular council member. At least that was my experience. So you had to know more. You had to be willing to work harder, to stay in touch with all the things that you needed to follow. And so I had 6 years of experience, which I often said after that you shouldn't even try being mayor unless you've been on the council first.
Well, 21 years as mayor, when you look back on some of those years, you can't hardly miss the fact that you were mayor in '97 when the big flood hit. What was that like?
Yeah, well, that was quite an experience, to say the least. There were lots of things that we learned from that. I think we learned very clearly how important volunteer work is. I was always an advocate for volunteerism, but until you have to go through an experience like that, you really probably don't understand the extent of how important that is. Mm-hmm. And we would have lost the fight here if it had not been for the thousands of people who helped each other, helped their neighbors, helping people they didn't even know who they were. And it was just amazing. And as I went around during the flood, walking the dikes, talking to people who were impacted by the flood, and seeing all the ingenious things that people could do to try and protect their property. And the difficulty in sandbagging, especially here we are in the middle of a flood, and then we have this big winter storm, and people having
Did that storm play a role in saving us?
Oh, well, it was a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
It slowed the melt down a little bit because of the cold weather that came with it, but then it also gave us a whole lot more moisture, and so that was a double-edged sword, and that really added to the problem. And I think we were doing pretty well up until that storm hit, and then boy, things really came at us. A very difficult time.
Well, as somebody who came to town and threw some sandbags and later on had to go to Grand Forks and take my nephews who came home to live with us basically for the rest of the school year because my sister lived up there.
Yeah.
I don't think, 25 years later, I'm wondering if people realize how close it was, how devastating it was for people up and down the valley.
No, I don't. I don't think. And unless people have been through that experience, they maybe hear talk about flooding. They kind of And of course, I was just looking through some of the old records there, and we thought, our Minnesota DNR thought that we had had a 100-year flood in 97. Now we found out we didn't. In fact, we didn't even have a 100-year flood in 2009, which was the next biggest flood, and even bigger than 97.
Yeah.
And I think that whole experience, we learned through the flooding that sandbagging just doesn't cut it. That we could have lost in 97, and we could have lost even worse in 2009. But we had done enough flood mitigation work, both after 97 and after 2000 and before 2009, to make our city better protected. But I think we learned that the long-term sandbagging just wasn't going to cut it. I mean, you can't expect people regularly to come forward and try and do the effort that's
Not only that,
required.
but it's a roll of the dice.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is. I understood the need for permanent flood protection. I mean, we can talk about the design, we can talk about the growth areas, all of that. But what I remember a lot about the 97 flood, having served on a board similar to what you're serving on now that involves all these different governmental entities, is it was one of the best examples I ever saw of getting Minnesota and North Dakota and Manitoba in the same room and say, look, we can't keep fighting each other. We've got to work together on this.
Absolutely. And, you know, people don't remember or talk about the flood of 79, but 79 is what really brought our basin together. Mm-hmm. That's where we started the International Coalition, International Flood Coalition to begin with, and later now the Red River Basin Commission. We started that recognizing that this is a basin-wide issue and we have to have basin-wide solution. We have to work with our neighbors. And, you know, at the time of the 79 flood, we almost had civil war up north.
Yeah.
With farmers having to patrol their dikes with guns because they were afraid people were going to knock their dikes down or try to change things around. And
there's nothing like water to get people fighting. I mean, nothing like water.
Exactly. And so we learned an important lesson after the 79 that we needed to work together as a basin, and that's what I've been focused on ever since.
Yeah. In your time as a legislator after that, you know, you got council, you got mayor, you've got floods, you've got all of that, and then it's like, okay, I'll head to St. Paul if you want me to. They did.
Yep.
They wanted you to go to St. Paul,
Yep.
And they wanted you to go. I don't think you didn't get beat. I mean, you could have been there as long as you wanted to be there. Did you carry some of what we're talking about as a priority to them?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I put together a bill that really would have put basin water management on the register as the way to do things in Minnesota. And you know, our Red River Basin, there are 9 basins in Minnesota. We're the only one that's organized as a basin, where we've got people working together across political jurisdictions trying to solve these problems. And I tried to get the state of Minnesota to move in that direction. I was successful in that we now in Minnesota have official statute that says we're not only to manage water through watersheds, but by a basin. Mm-hmm. And that wasn't in law before I was in the legislature. We didn't get it as far as I wanted. I wanted to provide incentives to watersheds and local entities to work on a basin-wide level. We had a plan to do that. I'd worked with a number of state leaders on water issues, and we had a very good draft bill. And unfortunately, that didn't get it as far as I wanted to. And if I had continued in the legislature, it would have been a continuing priority for me. But other things came along. I got involved with the poverty issue and worked on that very.
And you were a champion on higher ed. I remember that.
Yeah, and also, of course, with the stadium, the other thing that really.
Well, I'm going to get to the stadium. You hold off on that.
All right.
Because I was telling everybody about how you know how to flip a coin, but that's a whole nother issue. You know, the one thing that I think actually, I think it's for the most part true, is that Minnesota, because of what you just talked about, looking at it in terms of a basin,
Yep.
that water doesn't know where a county line is.
Exactly.
North Dakota was slow in coming to that.
Yeah.
They were really slow, and in some cases, they're still not there. That, if you're, and I'm not trying to pick on a county, but if you're Sargent County, once that water's out of the county and into Richland County, you're done.
Yeah.
And I don't
Yeah.
got to worry about it anymore.
Yeah.
And so holding it back, building dams, building basin storage facilities, that's not always that easy on my side of the river.
Yeah, no, exactly right. And that's exactly why I got to know and work with Tom Fisher, Senator Tom Fisher. And Tom understood the importance of basin-wide approach to things. And together we put together a bill after right in the middle of the 2009 flood to require a basin-wide plan for flooding study plan. And the Red River Basin Commission went to work in doing that. And now, ever since, we've been working on an update of it. And I can get into that too. One of the things that the update is going to do is to not only help move us to a 100-year level protection, but 200 and 500. What would it take to protect Fargo-Moorhead if we ever got to a 200 or 500-year flood event? Right now, the diversion will get us to 100-year. Right now, we're not in the 100-year. A lot of people still don't know that, Joel. A lot of citizens do not know that we're not even though we're better protected than we ever have, we're still not protected to a 100-year level.
Well,
with the diversion, we will be.
You said before we left about how we take it from here. So my question of you is this: how do we take it from here? You're still serving on these boards. You're still in the room. I mean, what do we do to take it to the next level?
Well, I think we have to keep working on the issues. I mean, I think we've made tremendous progress on the flooding issue. Flood mitigation efforts have really expanded, and we are much better protected than we ever were. Are we totally out of the woods? No, because we could still have a 200-year, 500-year flooding event here, which would the diversion wouldn't help us. I mean, it would maybe keep some water back for a shorter period of time, but if you get water up to that level, we're underwater as a metropolitan community. And so it's important that we keep in mind that even with the diversion now, we're going to have, if we get over a 100-year event, we're going to have sandbags and other measures to keep the water from flooding the streets.
So when you look at billions of dollars, both federal, state, and local partnership on all this, why isn't it being built then big enough?
Well, I suppose that's a very good question, because what the experts are saying, that'll get you to the 100-year level. That's been the standard. I mean, that's what everybody has tried to achieve, is a 100-year level of protection. That's an event that only occurs once in 100 years. And the 2009 flood, now the experts say, was a 1 in 50-year event. So that was the worst one we've experienced so far. And of course, the 97 flood was nowhere near, according to flooding statistics now, to a 100-year level. In fact, that wasn't even 50-year level.
So you look at where this goes from here, and you see all the town being built up around it. Let's use North Dakota. Well, actually, you could use Moorhead. Moorhead's moving south, and there's a lot of new home development. Moorhead's growing. It's growing significantly. And then you look at West Fargo. We had Jim Jonas on before you, and now they're talking about 3 high schools in West Fargo instead of 2. And then you look at Fargo, and it's becoming this long, narrow city, which, quite frankly, I've got family on the southern end of that. And when she first built her home, Ashley and her family, they were out there in no man's land. And now it keeps going south. And so, how do we pick and choose what we're going to defend as this fight goes forward?
Yeah. Well, I think we need to be thankful that we've got the diversion that is going to provide us more protection than we've ever had. But we also need to understand that if a bigger event comes along, we're still going to have to do things to protect ourselves, like sandbags or other preventative measures, no question about it. And so, yes, we've made tremendous progress. We're greatly relieved that we have the diversion, but that's why the Basin Commission is working on what do we need to do to protect our communities to the 200 or 500 year level. And so all flood mitigation is not a done deal.
Yeah.
And we've made tremendous progress in all of that. But the other thing I was going to say is that now, the next big issue that we had a taste of last summer, the potential of drought. And there was an article in the paper just yesterday where the guy who was the head of our water treatment plant for years when I was mayor kept telling us, we got to be careful we don't pollute the Buffalo Aquifer, because the Buffalo Aquifer is our prime source of water, in addition to the river. And, if we ever had a contamination there, then water supply is even more of an issue for Moorhead. And it's obviously, water supply is the next really big issue that we have to really pay attention to. And as you've already seen in North Dakota knows that. And I just was on a program with Bruce Furness. Bruce has always been an advocate of the need for water supply issues. Mm-hmm. And so we just need to keep working on the fact that water issues are paramount. We take it for granted that we're going to have water when we need it.
Yeah.
That's not something we ought to do.
Well, people talk about drought from last year, and they look at central North Dakota, south central North Dakota, and they look at, what happened, no pasture land, those type of things. There were things found in the Red River last year that people hadn't seen for a long time.
Yes.
Red River was low, and of course, Garrison finally getting that pipeline to come through, that's going to alleviate some concerns for everybody.
Yeah.
And so I think, like you said, North Dakota has realized that problem for...
Well, the Red River Valley Water Supply Project is still very much needed for the basin.
Right.
And we need to remind people of that water issues are not over. And then, of course, water quality. Water quality is going to become even more important.
Right. So I'm not going to let you go until I talk about the flip. I'm at the Vikings game, season ticket holder. I see Morrie Lanning walk out there as a champion. To be from Moorhead and to be a champion of U.S. Bank Field and the Minnesota Vikings in that stadium kind of made me proud to know that I knew you and that you were going to be the one flipping the coin. What did that feel like to be on the field that day?
Well, that was a great feeling, and I could write a book about my experience on getting that project done. And I felt all along that anything big like that, you've got to have bipartisan support to make it happen, and we got that done. That if neither party would have been able to do it alone, that only because we had enough Republicans and enough Democrats working together to get that done, that we got it done. Mm-hmm. And that was the secret, absolutely the secret. And we had all kinds of contortions we had to go through to get the deal. And I'll never forget right towards the end where we had to tell the Vikings they had to come up with more money in order to
And the Wilf family did.
And they did.
Yep, they stepped up. Morrie, always good to visit with you. Thanks for taking the time.